Thanks all of you for joining. Really excited. We are covering logic games tonight, specifically ordering logic games, relative ordering logic games in particular is the focus of tonight's class. To put them in context just for a moment, in logic games, you have ordering, aka sequencing or linear. You have grouping, of which there are a few different types. And then you have combinations of both ordering and grouping, as well as really mixes of any type. But classically, you have putting things in order. You have grouping variables of one type with variables of another type, or separating them in some way or associating them in some way. And you have combinations based on the task they're asking you to perform. LSAT themselves does not categorize games, but test prep folks like myself, we do tend to classify them or group them into broad categories to better illustrate the connections between different types. So again, tonight, relative ordering, which I would argue is perhaps the simplest classic type of game. I've put a link to the game for tonight in the chat here. This is a game that I wrote myself to, in a way, illustrate the classic nature of these games, as well as to make it freely available to anyone, regardless of their access to other exams. So I've put that link right there in the chat. So you can please pull it up if you like, and in one window, and then separately, of course, I have the whiteboard here where I will lay out or diagram this game bit by bit, and of course, invite feedback and questions from all of you throughout, as always. And if any questions come up, just feel free to interrupt me. Feel free to type your questions in the chat, and I will incorporate them into the session as best I can. So this game here is about the Magician's Alliance, inspired by the TV show Arrested Development, for those who may be familiar with it. Basically, we're putting 8 magicians in order. We are sequencing them. At the outset, they say, at the annual meeting of the Magician's Alliance, we have 8 magicians, and then I list them, LMNOPQRS, performing their illusions, one magician at a time. So we have one at a time. Right away, there is a sequence, there is an order. We then go on, the order in which they perform. So again, there is an order, is consistent with certain conditions. I'm not going to put the conditions in the chat as well, just so everyone has a copy easily. We have several different restrictions, limitations, rules. These rules, of course, relate to the 8 variables initially listed. They are all before, after in nature. L and Q after P. S before O and L. M before S. P before N. S and N after R. They're all before, after. They are loosely relating the variables to each other. There is nothing saying L is third. There is nothing saying P is fifth. There is nothing that is saying L is immediately before P. Nothing strict like that. Nothing where we would have perhaps something like 7 different slots being laid out. So nothing like this. Instead, what we have is we simply have before, after. So we could say L and Q are after P. So we have the variable P. We have L and Q after it to start. Just loosely relating them in a web of sorts, laying them out bit by bit. So you could start off just like that. You could then say S is before O and L. Again, loosely relating them with each other. You could then say M before S. You could say P after N. And you could say S and N after R. Now, the issue is none of these are connected with each other. They are all separate rules, not neatly connected with each other. So we would then have to separately link them all together. For example, we have L here and L here. We have S here and S here. We have N and N. We also even have S there as well. So lots of connections, P, P, and so on. So it's actually kind of inefficient to lay them out in this way and later connect them together. It would be far more efficient to link them together as we go to more smoothly create a main diagram encompassing all of the rules at once, neatly linking them together. So I'm going to scratch this and start over rather than linking them separately, rather than drawing them separately and later connecting them. Why not just connect them from the start? So a lot of folks will do this first approach, then separately do a diagram perhaps to the right where they would connect everything together in a larger chain and so on. So I'm going to take it from the top, and instead of doing it as I did at the start, I'm going to link them together bit by bit from the beginning so that it's more efficient, saving time, allowing more time for the questions. So to start with, L and Q after P. We have S before O and L. So right away, we have that common variable L linking together the first and second rules. We then have M before S. We have P after N. And we have S and N each after R. So right away, from the beginning, they're all connected with each other. Any questions about the process by which I created that diagram? I'm happy to scratch it and start over from the beginning if anybody would like. And if you would like me to, you're certainly not the only one. So just let me know if you want me to clarify or take it from the top or talk further about any particular aspect of this diagram. Virginia says from the top. Excellent. Happy to do it. So L and Q after P. S before O and L. M before S. P after N. P after N, meaning N before P. Of course, it was not very nice of them, or me in this case, to switch it around. If we have two rules saying before, I could imagine many folks would also then write P before N as well, following that same flow, when actually they've flipped it, or I flipped it. So we should then think, okay, P after N, we've got, that means P is on the right, N's going to be on the left, assuming that you typically interpret things left to right, as most folks do. Then finally, S and N after R. We have N here, as we have N on the bottom left, S in the middle there. So best if we simply, and I'll rewrite that, if we simply say that R is before both of N and S. So there we have it. That's the main diagram. Now we've got a great comment here from Alan suggesting that variables might not apply in such, I think he's saying consecutive, meaning adjacent or side by side. Or maybe not all variables would even be listed at all. Am I covering what you said, Alan? Thank you. Okay, so basically the idea is that there could be potentially other variables inserted in between any of these. So this is simply a mapping of the relationships, but really we've got a lot of different possibilities here. So let's say there was a ninth variable like X. X could then go between N and P. It could go between S and O. There are lots of places it could fit in. We don't necessarily know where it's going to be. It could be a floater. It could be anywhere is my point. So it's not as if we necessarily have R and P adjacent, consecutive, side by side. And even in this case, the variable M, for example, over here could be in between R and N potentially. We don't know. All we know about M is that is somewhere before S. So if we look at this diagram here, I'll make that a little bit more clear. Who could be first in this setup? R. So we got Caleb saying R, Hiart saying R, Alan saying R. Fantastic. So yes, R could be first. We also have other folks saying M as well. Natalie says M, September, Alan, Caleb. Awesome. Fantastic. So both M and R could be first. We know they could be first because there is nothing that could go before them. Or nothing that must go before them, I should say. So because there's nothing that needs to go prior to M and R, either one could be first. Also, looking at this diagram, who could be last? We got folks saying OLQ. Excellent, fantastic. So all the way on the right, basically all the way over here, we've got OLQ, all could be last. The reason being that nothing at all needs to go after them. So if nothing needs to go after them, then they could be the last ones. And then the other variables cannot be first or last, but must be somewhere in the middle. So basically we mentioned R, M, O, L, Q. We did not mention N, as N is in Nancy, S, and P. Those variables cannot be first, they cannot be last, but they could be somewhere in the middle. They may have their own restrictions within the middle, but beyond that, we're not going to bother going there right now. This is just to kind of cover the basics of interpreting this. Now, how do N as in Nancy and L relate to each other? We've got Denise saying N before L, Hiart saying N before L. Fantastic, yes. So N is before L. Could it be immediately before L? You all got it, fantastic. So because we have the ordering generally N before P before L, they cannot be adjacent, they cannot be side by side or consecutive, but loosely speaking, it is N before L. What about how do R and Q relate? R before Q, you all got it. Fantastic. So R is sometime before Q, not immediately before though, because we have N and P occurring between them. What about, let's see, M and Q? M is in Mary, and then Q. How do they relate to each other, if at all? None. Denise got it. Fantastic. So we have M before S before L, and we have Q is after P and R, but M and Q are never directly related to each other. There's always got to, basically it's open-ended, it's ambiguous as to how specifically they relate. Because if we go from left to right, we're not getting M, S, L, Q. That is not happening on this diagram. We could go from M to S to L, but then beyond that, it basically stops. It does not continue. We end with L. Nothing necessarily goes after them. So M is in Mary, does not continue to Q. It stops with L or O, depending on which direction you go in particular, or maybe even both. You could say MSOL, MSLO, but either way, Q is not contained in that sequence. It does not follow along that web. So it's open-ended. You could actually have R as in Robert, N as in Nancy, PQ. So following here, RNPQ, and then stopping there, then going back to the beginning with MSLO, let's say. That's entirely possible. I know it might seem weird, but that's the flow of a web like this. These diagrams can be really useful if you follow them as they go, but you can't insert your own assumptions onto them. It takes a little bit of time to learn to interpret and read these properly. Of course, I have many video explanations walking you through this game type with a variety of different actual games as examples, and you'll see that what exactly the constraints and limitations are. I'm aiming to give you a taste of that here, and of course, go more in depth into everything about this particular game. But it is important to remember that if we go RNPQ, we can then go back to the beginning at the top. Similarly, we can, with M. On the flip side, we can do MSL, Mary, Sam, LO, and then back with RNPQ. Entirely possible. Except for the P restriction, actually. So let me change that a little bit. Let's say here we could do MSO. Then could we do RNPLQ? Would that work? What's the problem? Caleb? Why not?
Because R has to go before S.
Fantastic. So there are actually some restrictions we have to keep in mind. That, in particular, we have R is before S. So could we say instead RMSO and PLQ? Would that work? Okay, what's the problem this time?
It's missing N. Unless you said that. I don't.
Well, I said, I'll write it down, RMSO NPLQ.
Oh, no, then it's fine.
Yeah, it does have N before P.
Sorry, I didn't hear the N part.
Oh, no, it's all good. I know some letters sound the same as each other, but basically that constraint, that diagram, that specific scenario would actually be fine because we still maintain N before P as well as maintaining all the other rules. And so this is yet another example of how we could have RMS, we could have going from left to right on the top and then go back to the quote unquote beginning with N over here and continue forward. So it would be okay. These diagrams do not, even though N is on the left, it might seem like it's always going to be early. What that means is that it could be early in many cases, but could also appear in this case, fifth. So again, if this is problematic, you're certainly not alone. It takes a while to get the language of making these kinds of diagrams, but it's important to do because it's just too much to hold everything in your head all the time. Some folks will have the temptation sometimes to say, this is too complicated to bother drawing out and dealing with diagramming. I'm going to do it in my head and forego that altogether. And you might get some questions right if you're really good with your short-term working memory, but eventually you might hit a wall because games are complex. They tend to push those limits. So I'd recommend against that approach. And even if it works for you on the easy games, it may well not work on the tougher ones. And so I would take the time. So I'm going to, again, draw this from the top. So we have a clean version going forward, and then we'll get into some of these questions here. So again, L and Q after P. Then we have S before O and L. We have M before S. We have P after N, meaning N is before P. And then we have S and N after R. So those are our 8 that we will begin with. And then, of course, we may draw hypothetical or local scenarios for particular situations. So the first question we have here is a typical orientation question where we take Ideally, there are two routes you can take. I'll tell you the inefficient one that many students go for, and then the more efficient one. Some folks will look at choice A and then take all the rules and check them against choice A. The problem then is that you're going to cycle through all the rules for every single choice. There's a switching cost each time you switch to a different rule. So I recommend instead taking one rule at a time and applying that rule to all 5 choices to check for violations of that rule. And you may often find that each rule only violates one choice, but sometimes it will actually violate more than one choice, which is nice because then you're eliminating more stuff. So let's start with first rule, L and Q after P. Which choice does that violate, if any? Fantastic. So choice D is in Delta, does not have L and Q after P. It actually has P before Q, no good. So for that reason, A is eliminated. And I'll put the question text here in the chat in case folks would find it useful, along with a link to this particular game. So bottom line, D is out. Whoops, I eliminated the wrong one there. My bad. Okay, next we have S before both O and L. Which choice does that violate, if any? Fantastic, you all got it again. So O is before S in this case, no good. We need S before O and L, and so for that reason, C is gone. Next, we have M before S as a rule. Which choice does that violate, if any? Fantastic. So choice B is in Bravo. We have S before M, no good. B is out. Next, we have P after N, meaning N is before P. What does that knock out, if anything? So we're down to A and E. Nothing, exactly. So you all got it. Mohammed, September, Matthew, Sochita, excellent, fantastic. So M before S, and P before N. P after N does not get rid of anything at all. Both A and E are good on that issue. So didn't give us anything. We can move on to the final rule, S and N each after R. A, fantastic. A is out. So E is our answer to this one. And in fact, it's not that surprising that we would have one rule not violating any choices, because we have 5 rules, 5 choices. We can't knock out all the choices, of course. And so in this case, one rule, P after N, ended up not helping us at all, but that's fine. We still were able to use the others well. Any questions regarding that approach? So by elimination, of course, E is our answer. All right, well, if nothing else on that one, let's go on to the next. We have number 2, which of the following cannot perform third? So this relates to a bit of the work we were doing earlier with interpreting who can go first, who could go last. This time we're looking at who cannot go third, meaning who has some constraints regarding their position, perhaps a bit more than others. So I see a lot of folks put C in the chat. Fantastic. Anybody want to talk through why? Why can't O go third? And how do you all get it so fast?
I can, if you want.
Yeah, please go right ahead.
So you have MSO, and then you have R has to go before S. And so when you put it in, if you were to put O in 3, there would be no room for R. That makes sense.
Fantastic. Yes. So we have 3 different variables we have S, we have M, we have R. They all have to go before O. If you start with O and look backwards, you have S and M going before it. You also have, going a different route, O to S, then S to R. There's a line there connecting those two as well. So for that reason, you actually have 3 different variables going before O, meaning that the earliest O could ever appear is on slot 4. So for that reason, we can, of course, knock out that possibility, and C becomes our answer. So fantastic. Well done. That's it. Did any other choices here seem tempting? I see September put A for this one, suggesting that M could not go third. I could talk through that one a bit. And of course, folks, let me know any others. So M, we know, goes before S, before O, and before L, meaning that M could not go too late. M could not go on 6 or 7 or 8 because at least 3 variables must go after it. But otherwise, M is actually pretty open-ended. We could have R, then N is in Nancy, then M is in Mary, and then SPOLQ. So to list that possibility, we could have R, N, M, S, P, O, L, Q. M is third, doesn't violate any of the rules. And we could even check through all the rules as they're originally listed if you wanted to. L and Q after P, it's happening. S before O and L, also happening. M before S, we're good. P after N, also good. S and N after R, also fine. So we are in accordance with, meaning we are not violating any of the rules, yet we've been able to place M on 3. So it works. Of course, it would be incredibly time-consuming to do this for all 5 choices on test day. I'm not recommending that you write out different hypotheticals like this to test out particular choices. Ideally, you'll get to a point where you can simply read the diagram and be able to, quote unquote, see this possibility without literally writing it down every time. But it's still useful to be able to do this as a drill, as an exercise when you're learning. And if you were down to 2 choices and you need to test something out, totally fine. This is a tool in your toolkit to use when you need it, but you don't want to, quote unquote, brute force a game, meaning just manually list everything concretely all the time. It would just take far too long. But we do have proof here that M on 3 works. Had I drawn this on an actual exam, I would save this on my scratch paper in order to potentially reuse it down the line. And by the way, for the LSAT Flex, you do get scratch paper, 5 sheets, double-sided is 10 pages, plenty of space. Not unlimited, but more than enough. So you'd be able to draw this and plenty of other things and be totally fine. So anyway, of course, our answer was C, O on 3 does not work because you've got to fit RMS before it. And I actually just erased everything, so I will have the opportunity to once again draw it all out. But we had L and Q after P. Okay, so continuing on, O on 4, if no other questions regarding that one. If O is on 4, what must be true? So, O on 4, what's happening in the first 3 slots? To some extent. At least we may not be able to draw it literally, but what can we say? I see Alan wrote RMS. That certainly is a possibility. Does it have to be that exact specific ordering, though? I see Lindsay wrote either R or M is first, S is second, O is third. Fantastic. I see that Lindsay wrote a dual option suggesting that R and M would be interchangeable. Alan further clarified the dual option with R/M before the other one of R/M, then S, then O. I like that one because it really shows that it's both R and M occurring before S, before O. So that would be my preferred way. In fact, what I might do if I were drawing a more specific strict diagram is I would do something like this: R/M before M/R before S before O. That reflects two different possibilities to me. One is that maybe we have on the left side of that slash, we have R first, M second. On the other side, the other possibility that is contained within this, we might have M first, R second, and then S third, O fourth. That would be my way of doing this, diagramming it strictly in a strict style. So you could imagine perhaps 4 different slots. Something like that. You could do it that way if you wanted to. Perhaps for a main diagram, you might number them 1, 2, 3, 4. For a local or diagram, meaning one that is specific to a particular question, I would not draw numbered slots. I would maybe draw it more loosely, or at the very least, I would not number them just because it takes time. What I would do for a game of this type, though, is a little bit different. What I would do in this case instead is I would simply say, okay, well, we've got what we have right on the top of this main diagram. So we have S before O, before S, we have M on the one hand, R on the other hand. Both of these variables are occurring before S, and then S is occurring before O. After that, what do we have? What's coming later for the remaining variables? Lindsay writes N. Fantastic. So after O, we are going to have N. Then what comes next? Fantastic. So Cheetah writes P. That's exactly right. Then after P, we have L and Q. And there you have it. So L and Q are interchangeable on 7 and 8, just like M and R are interchangeable on 1 and 2. So again, you could imagine in a more strict sense, we have on the left, we have 1 and 2, M and R interchangeable there. We have S on 3, O on 4, N on 5, P on 6, and then L and Q on 7 and 8. I put the numbers far away just because I don't want it to get cluttered and because I want you to loosely see that relation, but I don't want you to rely on the numbering. I want your interpretation of the diagram to provide the numbering without it literally being present on the page in front of you. But that's how I would understand it. And whether you do my particular style in this web is up to you. What we've been talking about that others wrote in the chat could also be a good way to do it with those slashes, those so-called dual options, could be another way to go about it. But regardless, this is the diagram. I'll erase the numbers. Feel free to write them on your end if you like. And let's think about, okay, well, now that we've gone this far, we've got the diagram, we have the local limitation. What's the answer? If O is on 4 for number 3, what must be true? I see Matthew and Sochita wrote both C, P on 6. Fantastic. It's pretty much what I showed earlier. We have L and Q interchangeable on 7 and 8. So therefore, since P is immediately before one of them, it's got to be on 6. N on 5, O on 4, S on 3, M and R on 1 and 2. So you all got it. I'm going to look at Alan's comment here. Because this is a must be true question, A can't be as R and M are interchangeable. That's good. Excellent. So great point. Eliminating A there. Must M be second? No, because there is nothing must that is a must regarding M, except that it's got to be in one of the first two. But as for which specific one of the first two, we can't say. Well done. Alan knocks out B for the same reason, L on 5. So L on 5, well, L, as we saw here, is going to be at the end on 7 or 8. So that's knocked out as well. He writes for C, it has to be the case as 7 and 8 have L and Q. Perfect. You got it. Well done, Alan. Any other questions regarding this, about any of the other choices or the approach in general for this kind of diagram? All right, well, if not, well done. Let's continue. So we've got for number 4, if P is before S. And so I'm going to erase this particular local diagram on test day. Of course, I would save it to the side somewhere, but I want to make sure we have plenty of space here. So number 4, if P is before S. So that is something we did not have in the original main diagram. You see on the original main diagram that P and S are basically, they appear vertical. They appear to be roughly in the same place, although of course we know based on our previous work that is not true. It's totally fine for P to go before S and maybe even for S to go before P for more local constraints. So I will start making the local diagram by putting P before S and then filling in everything else around that. Just like for number 3, I started off putting O on 4 and saw what the consequence of that was. So P before S, we start there. Now we could either continue with S or continue with P and build out from there. In this case, I'm going to build out from P going earlier, just because we got to start somewhere. It's fairly arbitrary what I'm choosing. So before P, we have N. Before N, we have R. Before R, we have S, but we've already got R before S on here, so that's not especially useful. We can continue from S and say that before S, we've got to have M. After S, we've got to have O and L. Only variable missing is Q. All we know about Q is that P has to go before it, or in other words, Q has to go after P. So I will link that in. And that's my diagram. Any questions about it? So I just built bit by bit, step by step. What I get is what I get. If it ended up not being easy to read for some reason, I might lengthen one of the lines. I might erase something and redraw it. You see even here from the top that the R before S line is somewhat longer than many of the others. I just did that because on the main diagram, I just did that because I needed to fit things in. Length of lines is totally irrelevant. You do what you need to do. I'll make that O a little bit clearer. So we then go on to the choices and the rest of the question actually. So this is a must be false, except 4 of them must be false. 1 of them is not necessarily false, meaning it could be true. So to rights could be true, exactly. So many folks will find it easier to think in positive terms than negative terms. So I'd recommend reframing it for yourself to simply say, could be true. Easier to think about, perhaps. Might try it. So we go through the choices one by one and ask ourselves, is it possible? If not, eliminate. If you can make it happen even just once, then it's your answer. So out of these, what could be true? A lot of folks are saying D. Let's start there. So could Q be on 6? Let's see if that seems like a possibility. Well, we've got Q appearing after R, N, and P. So it can't be any of the first three, could be 4. What has to go after it? Nothing, really. So it seems that on the initial read, Q could be anywhere from 4 through 8, since nothing has to go after it, but it only needs to go after R, N, and P. So yeah, Q on 6 seems totally fine. If you felt confident in reading your diagram, you could pick that and move on. You could also, of course, draw it out. I'll draw a scenario just to test that and see concretely for everyone now if that actually works. So I'll make a little number 6 just to anchor me. I might not draw the number 6 on test day. I might not draw it for any of the other numbers, numbered slots or variables, but I'll do it for that particular one. What's going after it if it's on 6? What needs to go late? If we kind of mentally chop it off here, I'll draw a little red line here. And we separate it from all the others and kind of remove it, disregard it. We then have the general order of SOL appearing on the remaining latest 3 slots. In this case, as folks are saying, O and L will go on 7 and 8 interchangeably. I'm going to do a strict ordering here for local diagramming purposes. O and L and L and O are on 7 and 8. We're then going to have S as the next latest variable, meaning it's going to go on 5, since Q and O and L are fitting on 6, 7, 8. So S will go on 5. And then we're going to have R, N, P, M somewhere in the first 4. As for where specifically they will go, we can't say 100% because M, as in Mary, could float around anywhere on those first 3 slots. First 4 slots, actually. So we've got S on 5. Then we're going to have M, P on the next level, meaning either M or P will be on 4. Then we have N and R coming earlier. So we have either R or M on 1, N is in Nancy or M is in Mary on 2, P or M on 3 and 4. Then we have S on 5, Q6, O and L on 7 and 8 interchangeably. This is the most local, strict diagram I can create with this scenario. Bottom line is a way to prove that Q on 6 works. I wouldn't draw this on test day. I would trust my local web diagram being this style, but that bottom one also gets the job done if you want to literally prove things under untimed practice conditions. As for what I would actually do on test day, I would just scan through the choices one by one and check each of them against this diagram I've circled in red to check, must it be the case? Sorry, could be true for the must be false except could be true. So could R be on 3rd? No, because it's got to have too many things after it. It has nearly everything after it except M is in Mary. So it couldn't go that late. Latest it could go would be on 2. L on 5, as we saw, it's got to go pretty late. Not going to work either. And so on. P also has to have too many things after it for it to go on 6. L could go on 7 or 8. Doesn't have to be 8 in particular. Any questions on this? All right. And finally, let's go to number 5. So number 5, R is after M and O is before P. I'll erase what I've got here just to make some space. And we will start by drawing out that particular those particular limitations. and work from there. R after M and O before P. So I'll draw out each of those. I'm going to put R after M first because meaning to the left, because generally speaking, they tend to occur more on the left than O and P do looking at the main diagram. O's all the way in the top right. It's going to come pretty late. R's all the way on the bottom-ish left. It'll come relatively early on average. So I start with R after M. And then we have O before P. And I take it from there. I build things on, I connect them as I go. So what else do we have? How can we link these? And you notice I'm drawing them on different levels. The reason is that I don't know how exactly they're going to relate. And so I want to keep it relatively more open-ended to allow for various different possibilities. So I just really would start at the easiest point I can think of and build outwards from there. So I've got P is before L and Q. I'll map that on. I've got S is before both O and L. I've already got here that O is occurring before L because P is occurring before L. So I'll add that on here. Now, my goal will ultimately be, of course, to link in these two things with each other. I have M before S as a rule, but right now, M is immediately above S on my diagram, so I'm going to have to shift things over a bit to better accommodate. So I'm going to put M before S here, all the way on the left, and then M before R as well, reinserting that particular limitation from the question stem. Now I've got 7 out of 8 variables listed here. I've got to just fill in the remaining single variable, which is N as in Nancy. We've got on the main diagram, R is before N and N is before P. So I can add that in to my local diagram, R before N, N before P. So you see, I get there in the end. This is really, in my view, the ideal local diagram for this question. I didn't really know what it was going to look like in the end. I wasn't really sure how I was going to get there. I had to modify things, move them around, erase and rewrite. That's part of the process. You're not necessarily going to get it perfect from the outset. I purposely did not look at my local diagrams that I've drawn previously for this game because I wanted to show you the process of how to write this, even if it's messy, even if we don't know it in the process. And for those who are curious, I've drawn years ago, I prepared the links for you just to show them, but I haven't even looked at these in quite a while. These are my local and main diagrams for this game. It may even be a bit more, it may look a little bit different in the process, but that's generally it. Hannah's pointing out, isn't R before S as well? Thank you for pointing that out, Hannah. That is one thing I did not include here. So yes, R is in fact before S. So I should link that in also. Thank you. Let me double check if there's anything else that needs to be included here. R before N, before P, before L, yes. N before P, before Q, that's good. M is before S, before O. Yeah, that's the rest of it's all covered, but that is an important thing to include as well. So thank you again, Hannah, for that. So that's the end point. Got it all covered. Let's see, is there anything else we can cut out of this process? Yeah, well, if M is before R is before S, we could then actually make this a bit more succinct and say M is before R is before S, because that covers M before S as well. So next step, as Alan writes, can't we just say R is on 2? Yes, we can also say that M is on 1. So you could say M1, R2. Then you have N and S interchangeable on 3 and 4. You also have ambiguity regarding N and O as well, regarding what's happening on maybe 4 and 5, P on 6, L and Q on 7 and 8, interchangeably. So the main ambiguity here is regarding S and O on 3, 4, 5, where exactly they will play out. If I knew where this was going to go, I might have drawn this more horizontally from the start to show exactly how M is 1, R is 2, P is 6, L and Q are 7 and 8. But this reflects what I think is maybe more realistic for in the moment, just building it out, linking things as you go. Anyway, let's look at the question and the choices, if nothing else on the main diagram part here. They're asking what could be true. What could be true? Anyone have answers on this? Any thoughts around it? Matthew says C. Sochita says C. Excellent. Yeah. So the main ambiguity here is regarding the positions of NSO. So I would expect a choice, the correct answer to be related to NSO. Maybe L and Q on 7 and 8, because there is ambiguity there as well. But I think the tougher ambiguity regards those particular 3 variables and their positions. So N on 4 is in fact the answer here. We can run through some of the others. O on 3. Oh, sorry, M is in Mary on 2, no good. R is on 2. O on 3, we've got to have S before it. So the earliest O could ever appear is on 4. O on 3 would not work. But N on 4 does work because we could have S on 3, N on 4, O on 5. So C is our answer. S on 5, it can't go that late because it's got to have O after it. So if P is on 6, O on 5 means the latest S could go would be on 4. So D's out. Then E, L on 6. No, L's got to be on 7 or 8. Alan does a walkthrough here of the first 3 choices, discussing them. Just checking over what he wrote. Yeah. Alan's write-up in the chat is solid. Well done. So there you have the game. This is the approach for a relative ordering game, aka a relative sequencing game, whatever you want to call it. Loosely relating variables to each other. I believe the web diagram is the best way to go here. Questions regarding the game type, the approach, anything I said or covered up to this point? Yeah, Alana, please.
Steve, this is Alana. Yeah, I guess I'm totally following everything you're doing here. I'm curious if there's a way that you could lead me to some really challenging relative ordering questions, like the most advanced that the LSAT makes. Because I used to hate these games. They used to be so hard for me, and now they're like so easy. And I'm like, well, that's good, but I also want to be ready for test day for like the hardest of this question type.
Yeah, certainly. Look at the exams numbered 50, 51, and 52, because they cover relative ordering, but they also have some tricky conditional rules as well, meaning things like if A is before B, then C is before D.
Ooh, like formal logic into these.
Yeah, so a bit of conditionality there. I have a few articles on that as well. I'll see if I can quickly pull up the link for everyone. But basically that is...
Well, I think this might be like the only area of the LSAT where I'm like, give me the most difficult questions they make.
yeah, totally. So it's exam... Actually,
I'm getting there.
So it's exams 51, 52, and 53. I'm putting some related links in the chat for those who want to encounter some of the tougher variations of this type. Definitely threw folks for a loop. Certainly took me some time to dissect them. It's one of those things where it becomes a lot more comfortable once you've done it, once you've seen it before and you're not in a way, reinventing the wheel on test day, and you can more quickly interpret it. Definitely easier to handle. So check those out. As Sochita wrote, I also have lists of the hardest games of all time. Games you definitely want, regardless of game type. I'm including one of those lists here in the chat as well. I also have a list of curveball games, meaning they're games that have a really a big twist to them, putting that link in also. All right, folks. Well, we are there. We've got the student study group happening now. Link is in your email from about an hour ago. Thanks to all of you for showing up, for your engagement. You all rocked this. If you need anything, reach out. Of course, please share feedback as always, and I'll see you all soon. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for joining.